Hey, good evening, everyone. Judith Kate Friedman here, and this is the last of a whole series of little YouTube. This is the last of a whole series of little YouTube. This is the last of the whole series of little YouTube videos that we've been doing today, little tasters from The Other Within, The Genius of Deformity in Myth, Culture, and Psyche by my beloved Daniel Deardorff, who was beloved to many in different ways. The two of us were life partners for the last 14 years of his life. I have a lot of different things I've gotten to do in my life, including write a lot of songs with hundreds and hundreds of people and create an organization called Songwriting Works Educational Foundation. And now under the umbrella of that, having served thousands of elders across the cognitive continuum, across the physical health continuum, dedicating the training of teaching artists and the facilitating of programs to allow people who don't usually have access to benefits of music making for themselves as musicians, regardless of whether they were ever trained as musicians, to collectively compose music in community is a really wonderful thing that we've been able to do for now 32 years and train teaching artists to do. And so that organization in 2020, after the passing of Daniel, who was a board member and a guest artist and a volunteer par excellence, helping me out behind the scenes often, he passed in 2019, and the board agreed to add his work, his legacy projects, his music, his myth telling, his story carrying, and the way he facilitated to the degree that we can, because no one can replace him, as no one can replace anyone. But he left us a great legacy to carry forward. And so I am the steward now of the Mythsinger Legacy Project. I'm here with Ashley A. Friend and Audrey DeMola behind the scenes, helping us work this year to bring community events of different kinds, often in Zoom. We're meeting to be around a virtual hearth during this time when we are still not gathering in person for the most part, and also so we can bring together people of all physical situations, whether they can travel or not, and of all health situations, and of all global locations, which has been the most wonderful to be around a virtual hearth with people from 7 countries listening to ancient myths being told by a master teller on newly mastered recordings that bring him totally into the room with us. And it's our imagination that's on fire, along with the fire in the story and kindling the story. So we've been doing those hybrid kinds of things, bringing in the archival voice of Daniel Deardorff, bringing this book forward in a 3rd edition, with new commentaries by Robert Shaw and Martin. Someone just knocked on my door, I think. With new commentaries by Robert Simmons and Martin Shaw, and a lot of work that Daniel did over the years. He first published the book, maybe it was 200 pages in 2003. And the 2nd edition, he added a section, and it grew, and it added a glossary, and now it has 2 more sections of commentaries in addition to Robert Bly's introduction, and some words from me, and an expanded glossary. And we're just thrilled to be published by Inner Traditions. And I hope you'll take a look at this book on their website. You can look in the chat for that link. And I'm going to read from this chapter called The Cauldron. And as I've been doing today, I might start to sing spontaneously too, depending on how the mood strikes. But also, if there's anything in particular that you would like to connect about, you can put it in the chat. And even if you're not watching the live, but you're finding this after the fact, we will answer you. So look forward to that exchange. Between the village and the forest lies the long road of exile. In both the inner and outer worlds, For surely the individual is also a village. The road of exile is the distance and depth of denial, dividing the village hearth from the forest hut of the stranger, the wild one, who is lost, unwanted, unwelcomed, the lost, unwanted, and unwelcomed portion of self and soul. To be wider in living, then, and those are words of Kenneth Patchen, that phrase, wider in living, means widening the heart, enough to make sacred our missing parts, for half-heartedness can never admit the defect, the lost leg, the lost eye, the weird incompleteness, the radical uncertainty that is the doorway to the sacred. And when he speaks of the sacred, he's not only speaking in a more narrow swatch of religiously what people might mean, but to make sacred, to acknowledge the incredible, to have reverence for the incredible life force that is within everything. Walking the road from loss to sacrality is the meaning of sacrifice, he tells us, and this is more than mere semantics. It is the long forgotten initiatory journey from the childish perspective of victimization to the fullness of a mature volitional exchange with the other world, a Faustian bargain, to use Howard Gardner's term. To make this sacrifice is not to be martyred to some great cause, nor does it mean that violence is justified and divinely ordained. Sacrifice in the sense given here means to make sacred through the wound, in devotion to the trialogue of stranger, village, and road, the personal, local, and universal. I'm just going to pause there for a moment and see if there's anyone who wants to put a question or a comment about that. To make this sacrifice, to walk this road separate from the childish perspective of victimization, to come into a fullness of a mature volitional exchange with the other world, is not to be martyred to some great cause, nor does it mean that violence is justified and divinely ordained. Sacrifice means to make sacred through the wound, in devotion to the trialogue of stranger, village, and road, personal, local, and universal. Tensions build up in society. Repressed violence reaches dangerous levels, causing the breakdown of cultural distinctions, therefore return to chaos. A situation that René Girard terms a sacrificial crisis, which is analogous to the complexity catastrophe, where rigid intolerance requires ever-increasing measures and controls against contamination, ultimately reaching a catastrophic level of complexity. That is, the controls and the controls of the controls ad infinitum go spinning out of control. Does anyone recognize that happening around us? In this view, social coexistence, and here he's quoting, from René Girard. In this view, social coexistence would be impossible if no surrogate victim existed, if violence persisted beyond a certain threshold and failed to be transmuted into culture. This kind of mobocratic sacrifice is the device of structure, a hierarchic governor employed to maintain and uphold the lie of the unthreatened, as if there was none, as if one could ever be unthreatened. The safe and comforting delusion of permanent structure. To this end, the mob engages in unanimous violence, sacrifice, herein the expulsion and extermination of a scapegoat or surrogate victim, permits the collective purgation of all repressed, unfulfilled, and unacted desires. This is a much larger conversation, but this is the passage that wanted to come out tonight. So, I don't know, feed it to your mind as you listen to the news or as you walk in the forest. No doubt, on a global scale, the institutionalized practice of surrogate victimage has been the primary method and strategy of civilization's conquest abroad and oppression at home. That's a quote from Stanley Diamond. And finally, what I'll say here to try to sum up the ideas in this part. Where does this violence come from? Simplistically put, it comes from resentment, which is due to a certain perceived lack. So the idea that there's a perceived lack, I'll just sit with that for a minute. I've done a lot of work on this in recent years around my own sense of enoughness or not enoughness. So what's the perceived lack that society has about people that it deems unworthy? What's the one that we have of ourselves? And what's the truth about where the lack is? Often there is definitely a lack of imagination and of willingness, of openness, of exploration, of acceptance, of access among the people who are making the judgment that other people lack something when we actually might be quite full and abundant in what we have and who we are. So those are just some thoughts to feed what I just read. And I'm just curious what the meaning here is. Someone is writing in the chat, surrogate victimhood is perfectly stated. Would you write a little more about what you mean? What it means to you? The surrogate victimhood. I'm reading in the chat now. I hope we'll get an answer. It's not like a quick turnaround answer, actually. The use of a scapegoat. Right. That whole piece where it turns but I don't know if I'll find it again. That a surrogate victim or scapegoat, when someone is blamed in the way that we are seeing some of that go on right now, with hatred of different kinds towards different people, permits the collective purgation of all repressed, unfulfilled, and unacted desires on the part of the people who are laying the blame elsewhere. That's pretty interesting. Audrey writes, Chase and I were talking earlier about limping your own limp, one of my favorite concepts. So I'm going to read the part that follows this regarding that, the next paragraph, in fact. The mistake in all of this is one of omission, the usual omission, where the victim's intrapersonal voice, his or her actual individual sacrificial experience, is not credited. What of the consciousness and sensibility of the victim or beneficiary? What if the perceived lack is transmuted from a source of resentment to a source of meaning? And if resentment is merely a defense against self-loathing, then what would happen if the self-loathing at the root of violence were interrupted in a truly sacrificial act of making sacred the missing parts by openly limping the limp and dancing the weird, generative, and agonizing dance of radical uncertainty? I'm going to read that one more time, and that's kind of a message to take and ponder for a while. What if the perceived lack is transmuted from a source of resentment to a source of meaning? And if resentment is merely a defense against self-loathing, then what would happen if the self-loathing at the root of violence were interrupted in a truly sacrificial act of making sacred the missing parts by openly limping the limp and dancing the weird, generative, and agonizing dance of radical uncertainty? That's the wish that I have for myself and all of you, the courage to more openly limp our limp, to roll our roll, to dance our dance, to walk in our weird, wonderful, unique ways, to carry our own truth and our perspectives, and to be more visible with them. So, yeah. Thanks, Audrey, for sharing tonight in the chat. Thanks to everyone who's listening. And we are wanting to thank everyone who's been part of our projects and gatherings for this whole year. And on this Giving Tuesday, also invite you, if you'd like to help us continue doing this work in 2023, to be part of our campaign, which we launched today, to raise $10,000 before year end. And that will supply us enough wood on the fire, so to speak, to have our very small team, our staff of independent contractors working just a few hours each, and some volunteers all gathered together to ensure continuity with Daniel's work going forward, and also with our sponsoring organization, Songwriting Works, to continue doing trainings for facilitators in 2023. So if you've got any interest in learning about the organizations, you can look in the chat to see the URLs, the websites, songwritingworks.org, mythsingerlegacy.org, and our Giving Tuesday Mighty Cause link, mightycause.com/songwritingworks will also get you there. Thanks so much for coming. It's good to see friends in the chat, and hope to meet some new of you. If you haven't subscribed yet to this channel, there'll be all kinds of different things happening here over time. So if you want to know when we post new things fairly often now, go ahead and subscribe, and we'll see you soon. Thank you. Be well.